We've talked a lot about the information landscape, which is a really important part of this war and all wars. Put this up on the screen. This was interesting for a variety of reasons. Okay, so this guy, Jeff Morris Jr., who I'd never heard of before, but he's apparently like a tech executive.
I know Jeff.
Former Tinder exec. You want to is there any other context?
Oh no, yeah, I was going to say he's a tech guy.
Okay.
He used to work at Tinder. That's how I know him.
And he's very Israeli sympathetic here. So he started taking a look at the data on TikTok to see what was going on. Because he's observing young people have a very different view of this conflict than older generations. So they get their information, largely on TikTok. What's going on here? So he says, I looked at the data, saw that Israel is losing the TikTok war by a long shot. As an example, the top hashtag is 3 billion views for Palestine versus 200 million views for Israel. If you look at the other hashtags, it is clear Israel has a distribution issue. Now, I would personally say Israel has probably some other issues than just distribution, but it was interesting the concern here that what was really to blame for the generational divide was the TikTok algorithm. And the concern that, listen, for a long time, for many years, just lockstep support for Israel, no matter what they did, was the bipartisan standard in Washington. It was what you got out of every single American media outlet, certainly on cable news, et cetera. And so this is a bit of a panic around the fact that there are these other platforms and other ways that people are getting their information that don't line up with the way the ADL guy would say, getting the story right as they see it.
I think it's generational in the sense that people did not come up in the same, not even in the same information area. But I think that the biggest reality is at our age, you have never really known a time of war. The most, the day I remember earliest from my youth is 9/11. So basically, crystal memory on forward is just war. And when you have that, you're going to come at things from a very, very different perspective than a lot of people who, for them, 9/11 was something that came in the context of they remember the Great Peace and winning the Cold War and all this other things that are foundational to their memory of America as this giant great power. They think of Israel probably much more in that context of the older times, and they may even think of it, with the Intifada and PLO and Arafat and all. So just the way that you think about these things is very different as opposed to, let's say, someone you're my age. Gaza and the Hamas situation have been going on for 15 years. That's pretty much all I know. I don't really remember a time pre-Hamas.
Yeah.
Most people don't either, who are especially younger. If you're really young, let's say you're 21, 19, that's quite literally the vast majority of your lifetime. And it's especially highlighted. Let's put this on the screen. The CNN poll, this is going really viral. What it does show you, at 65 years old and above, Israel's military response is fully justified. They say 81%. 50 to 64, 56%. 35 to 49, 44%. 18 to 34 is only 27%. And I really believe that comes from a place of war wariness more than anything. I've seen a lot of people be including, and look, I don't know Jeff well. I talked to him maybe once or twice. I'm assuming this is somebody who supports Israel and then is well, what is happening here? I would just really urge everyone look, with the TikTok algorithm, and you guys know, I would ban TikTok if I could, but it's not for reasons like this. It's for much bigger, national security reasons about America owning its company. What does everybody tell you about the TikTok algorithm? What is it best at? It serves you what you already want. It's not like it's being created out of thin air.
Right.
It's that these people are ingesting this content and are sharing it around and are finding it compelling, which is very counter-narrative. And it's not because it's being forced in front of them. Now, maybe if you can find out a case for why that it is, I would absolutely be willing to, to learn and to listen to it. But I suspect that that's really not the case here. I just think based upon swimming in a very different media environment like our show, and just, in general, keeping my finger on the pulse, I think we're living in two separate worlds. There are people who are on establishment Twitter and on cable and who are reading the papers. And then there are people like us who are swimming in the internet. And if you're in the internet, you have no choice but to engage with a lot of facts and video and elements and all these other things that you would never see if you were up there too.
That's very true. And it's also the case that, we see this with our show as well. If there is some perspective that is not being served by mainstream, guess what?
Key.
People go to YouTube, people go to TikTok, people go to Twitter to try to find more and find, more viewpoints that reflect the way that they are viewing the conflict. So there's certainly a generational divide here, and then there's also a divide in terms of people who are basically pro-Israel and they think, Israel's completely justified, et cetera, et cetera. They have all types of mainstream sources where they can go to see that viewpoint reflected. If your viewpoint diverges from that, you're more likely to be on TikTok. I also think, you talked about the war weariness. I think that's a really important point and one I didn't necessarily think of.
Oh, yeah.
I also think, the change in media is definitely part of it. The fact that you can even go anywhere and get those different views didn't used to be the case, a couple of decades ago. You also have generations that have never really, we didn't grow up in the Cold War. So this just they're on our side to fight communism, and that's that. They're the goodies. These are the baddies. That doesn't land for these generations the way that it does for, we had those numbers about 80-some% of the oldest demographics. Yes, 100%. Israel is fully justified. You also have, with this generation, in terms of this conflict specifically, there hasn't been a time in our adult lives when peace was really on the table.
That's a good point, too. We don't remember Oslo at all. I've only read about Oslo.
Exactly. So, even me being significantly older than you, that's distant. Matt was a kid, sort of vaguely aware of what was going on and not really, viscerally engaged with it whatsoever. So, we have never really, we don't have all this legacy of imagining that a two-state solution is still on the table.
Good point.
So I think that really changes the way we view this as well. And then something that we've talked about before and you've pointed out before too, Sagar, is that Netanyahu has also made this conflict much more explicitly partisan by coming to D.C., by giving the speech against Obama. This was in the context of the Iran nuclear deal, by putting his thumb on the scales. He tried to smooth things over by saying, yes, Biden won, et cetera, and pissing off Trump. But, the reality is he made this conflict much more explicitly partisan. So you have a variety of reasons why, if you take your average 80-year-old and you take your average 20-year-old and you ask them about this conflict, you are going to get completely different views of what's going on. The White House is apparently very concerned about the politics of how this is all going to work out for them. Put this up on the screen. They privately concede things have never been worse. Since the 80-year-old took office, Biden's dual horror shows threaten his re-election campaign. This is another Axios report. Some of the things that they cite here is, look, in the polls, he's tied or trailing Trump nationally in swing states. He gets crushed on his handling of immigration, crime, and inflation. They have a quote from one Biden official who says it's not death by one issue, by half a dozen hitting at once. The load-bearing wall breaks. Many of Biden's own voters do not want him to run. His popularity with his own supporters hit a new low in a poll this past week, and that seems to have been directly related to his approach to Israel's war on Gaza. You saw an 11-point drop among Democrats in their support for Biden, most of that coming from young demographics who are very unhappy with his just lockstep support for Israel and sending them whatever they want. You've got a quote here. You say the Middle East war gives the president a chance to project stable leadership ahead of a general election, but the White House knows the war will likely widen. And so one last piece here in terms of showing the generational divide. You've got this, I thought it was kind of a weird question. Put this up on the screen. But they asked, what should the U.S. government say publicly in regards to the Israel-Hamas war? This was by generation. So silent and greatest gen, 86% say they should support Israel. You go down to millennial and Gen Z, so not even just Gen Z, but millennials and Gen Z, and it's less than half who say they should support Israel. So while Biden, is satisfying one part of the Democratic base and certainly overwhelmingly the DC establishment, in terms of young people, this is really becoming a litmus test issue, and certainly for Arab Americans who've also been a key part of the Democratic coalition for them as well. And you can already see them paying the price in the polls. Now, one of the things that they said, I think it was in this piece that was like, oh, they think they'll get over it by the time the election comes around.
I do kind of think that's right. I think that with the specter of Trump and the fear around that the boogeyman, the boogeyman has always worked for Democrats.
We'll see. That's what they're betting on.
We'll see.
That's what they're betting on.
I would never bet on that personally. You can ask Hillary how that works out. But it's like,
I guess it depends on how this all, does this end in a week? Or are we still seeing, babies being pulled out of rubble and their incubators being shut off as we head into election day, which is real, real possibility. So I think this represents a more consequential break. Young people had already, it's easy to forget, but at the beginning of the Biden administration, young people were his most fervent supporters, his largest by the approval rating, his largest supporters, most fervent supporters, et cetera. That quickly fell off a cliff due to, I think, some of his, economic handling. And now this represents, for a lot of people, it's very emotional, it's very visceral, and a real break in terms of how they're seeing Biden, where it's no longer like, yeah, I kind of have affection for him, but, I don't love everything he's done, but whatever, I'll suck it up and vote Joe.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got other options on the ballot. So I think this is a real problem for them, and they apparently are aware of that as well.
Certainly possible.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.